Hello. This is the fifth of a series of 5 podcasts that looks at the early years of the Nazi Party, and this one focuses in on the final strand, which is the Munich Putsch of 1923, also known as the Beer Hall Putsch, which basically was Hitler's failed attempt to take power, or more to the point, was it actually a failure, which is a very common GCSE question. Okay, so you can see the sort of like particular strands we need to look at. What was Hitler aiming to achieve? What were the events, and was it a failure or was it a success? Okay, so first of all, the aims. What was Hitler actually aiming to achieve? Well, basically, zooming in on the map here, remember, and I'll mark this on at the bottom in blue, Hitler and so that's actually red. Hitler and the Nazi Party were based in Munich in Bavaria. Bavaria was one of the states, and you can see the different German states on the map there. You've got Bavaria, you've got Saxony, Thuringia, and so on. The states were parts of Germany, but they had a degree of self-government. They were allowed to have their own government for local matters. Remember, the capital of Germany was in the north in Berlin, and the capital city passed laws on national matters, but on local matters the state governments have their own governments. Now, many of these state governments were hostile to Berlin. They didn't like the Republic, they didn't like the new system, and that was certainly true of Bavaria. So when Hitler formed the Nazi Party in the Bavarian capital called Munich, which I've marked on the map there in the south, there is Munich. When Hitler formed the Nazi Party, he found it was a perfect place to form because the Bavarian police, the Bavarian state government, and the Bavarian local army leaders were very sympathetic to the Nazis, which helped the Nazi Party grow in that region of Germany. So, just pulling back a little bit, it was a planned march north on Berlin, but the point is, it never actually left Munich. Okay, on that level, it actually failed. So the first thing is, why did Hitler wait until 1923? Why not attempt this march in 1922 or 1921? The Nazi Party had been in existence for 3 or 4 years at this point. Well, there were 2 reasons for choosing this particular moment in time to march on the capital, Berlin, from Munich. First of all, remember 1923 was that crisis year. There was the hyperinflation. Many German people, in particular the middle classes, had their savings wiped out by the hyperinflation. So there was a definite increase in unpopularity for the government in Berlin, which therefore meant increasingly people turned to parties like the Nazis that were prepared to criticise the government in Berlin. So the Nazis gained increased support in 1923. Also, the second half of 1923, Stresemann, he was the Chancellor of Germany in the second half of 1923, called off the passive resistance. Now, the passive resistance for a short period of time made the government in Berlin popular, but when he called it off, yet again, the extreme right, groups like the Nazis, were using that phrase, stab in the back, November criminals, and so on, because the government was failing to stand up to the French invaders. So by this point, Hitler had about 50,000 supporters. Many of them were in his private army, the SA. He felt the Nazis were strong enough to actually march, especially if the Bavarian state government joined in and lent Hitler their own police and their own soldiers. And then there was one other factor. A different country to the south, in Italy, in 1922, a similar event had happened. An extreme right-wing party led by a man called Benito Mussolini had successfully marched on the capital of Italy, Rome, and had overthrown the Italian government, and Mussolini had taken power and set up a dictatorship. Hitler admired Mussolini, and he wanted basically to copy Mussolini. He believed, well, if Mussolini could have done it in Italy, then I can do it too in Germany. So Hitler's plan was to persuade the leaders of the Bavarian state government. The leader of the Bavarian state government, worth putting his name in your answer, was a man called Gustav von Kahr. So the aim was to persuade von Kahr to join with the Nazis in marching 400 miles north from Munich to seize control of the capital city, Berlin. And for a short period of time, it looked as if Hitler had done that. Remember, the people like Kahr, the leaders of the Bavarian state government, were very sympathetic to what Hitler wanted to do. They too disliked Berlin, the government in Berlin. They saw it as weak, as having stabbed Germany in the back in 1919. So there is a map which shows the planned march, but the point is it never got out of the city of Munich. So why not? Well, basically it failed in part because at the last minute Hitler lost a lot of support. Gustav von Kahr, the leader of the Bavarian state government, changed his mind, and as a result the people of Bavaria stayed loyal to von Kahr and they didn't march with Hitler, and it meant the Bavarian police and army likewise did not march with Hitler. Now at first Hitler believed that these people were going to march with him. They had led him to believe that they would join with him. There was a big meeting on the 8th of November in the evening in a beer hall in Munich, and Hitler was convinced that they were going to march with him, but at the very last minute Gustav von Kahr changed his mind. Now Hitler then showed his true colours on that evening in the 11th hour when the Bavarian leaders changed their mind. Hitler brandished a gun, he waved it at them, he threatened them, and they were bullied into agreeing to march with him. Hitler then went away, went back to bed for the night. The agreement was gather together first thing in the morning and we will start our march in Berlin. Hitler was expecting the Bavarian leaders and the army and police to be there waiting with him, to join with him in the march. But when he gathered in the square in Munich to begin the march the next day, the Bavarian police and the Bavarian army, rather than join with him, they blocked his way. So the Nazis were shot at, Hitler fled, and Hitler was arrested and he was imprisoned in February 1924. The Nazi party was banned. So the Munich Putsch on one level failed. On the other hand, you can develop a convincing argument, and you need to do this in the exam, that the Munich Putsch was actually not a complete failure. Hitler learned some lessons. First of all, in the trial, he was able to publicise Nazi ideas. Although he was a criminal, at court he was in the dock as a criminal for a traitorous act, for planning to overthrow the German government. He successfully used his position to publicise his ideas, and he turned on his accusers and presented himself as the hero, and he presented the accusers as the traitors. And he basically said, I am not the criminal, there is a bigger court here, the court of history, that will judge the government in Berlin to be the real criminals. And he talked about the November criminals, and everything he said hit the national newspapers, and it won him a lot of sympathy, and he got and it publicised Hitler. Up until that point, very few people knew who Hitler and the Nazis were other than people living inside Bavaria. Secondly, Hitler learned that he had the sympathy of a lot of very influential men in Germany. The army leaders, the generals, were sympathetic, and of course the judge who had sentenced him shortened his sentence to 9 months. So he learned that he had a lot of sympathy. And on that basis, he realised that when he got out of jail, if he played his cards right and worked with these men, he could take power, but he would need to have a different strategy, and that power was to hold his nose and enter the Reichstag. He doesn't like the smell of democracy, and the strategy was to take power by winning votes. Hitler realised it may take him 5, 10, 15 years, but he realised that using violence to seize power was not going to work. It had failed in 1923, so he abandoned that strategy. The violence would come after he had taken power. And he wrote his ideas, his new strategy down while he was in prison in a book called Mein Kampf, which translates as My Struggle. So there are some factual questions. Go through that, pause the podcast here, test yourself out. There are the answers. Okay, check yourself, check your answers. And finally go over to another podcast. You can click on the link on the PowerPoint or use the QR code there, and that will take you to another podcast that walks you through an essay question. And best advice, learn that answer. The answer is in frog. Play the podcast, learn it by heart, and then time yourself and write that answer yourself in 24 minutes. It's a very, very common type of question. Thank you very much.